على الهواء سوا على الهواء يأتيكم عبر أثير إذاعة
صباح الخير أمريكا.
من يوم اللي اتكون يا وطني الموج كنا سوا.
يمكنكم الآن متابعة برنامج سوا على الهواء على قناة ميوزك لايف عبر الدش نتورك شانل 633. البرنامج يبث لمستمعينا يوم الثلاثاء الساعة 8 صباحا حسب التوقيت الشرقي للولايات المتحدة في ميشيغان وتوليدو وأوهايو ووينزر كندا على الموجة المتوسطة wnzk 690 AM، ولمستمعينا في مناطق واشنطن وفرجينيا وميريلاند على الموجة المتوسطة wdmv 700 AM. يمكنكم الاستماع للبرنامج عبر الاتصال من أي هاتف على الرقم 702-489-0120. يتلقى البرنامج اتصالاتكم مباشرة من داخل الولايات المتحدة على الهاتف رقم 248-557-3300. الإضافة عبر سكايب US Arab Radio. للاستماع للبودكاست ushammedia.com.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and wdmv 700 AM.
Good morning. Now that Donald Trump is president-elect, how do Arab and Muslim Americans view his victory? He won the state of Michigan, where a large Arab and Muslim community lives. Who voted for him and why? And what is the standard upon which Arabs and Muslims in general vote for a candidate in the U.S.? There is evidence that Arabs in America are as divided, ethnically, religiously, and politically, as their fellow Arabs in their motherland. So how can anyone hope to have a solid voting bloc in Michigan and elsewhere in America? Today, we will reflect on the results of the presidential elections and what they could mean for the Arab and Muslim community here in the Middle East. I'm pleased to have with us two distinguished experts on the Arab American and Muslim American community, on American politics, and on American foreign policy in the Middle East. Dr. Saeed A, professor at Wayne State University, and later we will be joined by Dr. Hani Bawardi, professor at the University of Michigan. Let me start with you, Dr. Khan. Where does the Muslim community in Detroit stand now that after Mr. Trump's victory?
Well, I think, first of all, thank you for having me on this morning. The Muslim community is still 1 month after the election in a state of relative shock as to the result. I think it is without dispute that the vast majority of Muslims, particularly in the Metro Detroit area, according to exit polls, voted for Hillary Clinton. A few voted for Jill Stein. A very small percentage voted for Trump. And then some apparently didn't vote at all because they felt as though they were both very poor choices. I think right now their focus has shifted from necessarily looking at what a Trump presidency means when it comes to foreign policy and what it means for the Arab and the Muslim world, to really contending what is it going to mean for them here in the United States. There has been, over the last 4 weeks, an uptick in anti-Muslim rhetoric and violence against Muslims almost on a daily basis. And then also there is the issue about what kind of policies will a Trump administration bring that will affect them. There have been stories and, in fact, declarations about a Muslim registry. None of these things have really been walked back. In fact, in some cases, it seems as though they're being confirmed, and that's causing a lot of anxiety for the community.
Dr. Khan, when you talk about the concern within the community in Michigan, can we say that is a general trend among Muslims in America?
Clearly, and part of the reason for that is, as you have been, I'm sure, following, there have been reports of incidents across the country where Muslims are being targeted. In New York City, for example, there are cases of, just even yesterday, a young Muslim being pushed down the stairs at the subway, a case of a Muslim woman wearing the hijab who's a police officer, in fact, being threatened by individuals. And these individuals who are performing this abuse are, in fact, invoking the name of Trump. And what's fascinating is that it is happening in places where normally we would think that there's a lot of multiculturalism, a lot of tolerance, a lot of visibility of Muslims, and yet in places like San Francisco and places like New York City, you're having this happen. So it is a general mood whereby people are feeling as though there is no safety zone, that it does not matter about being in an area where there are large populations of Muslims. These things are happening everywhere, and that cause of anxiety is then affecting the community as a whole.
Dr. Khan, do you think Muslims should take part of the blame?
In what sense, if you don't mind?
Okay. In other words, what I'm saying is anti-Muslim actions and rhetorics have always been there since 9/11. So we went through this during the era, George Bush era. So is there any difference now that Donald Trump is just bringing back what we already know from 9/11?
Well, there's a few factors, and thank you for expanding on that. First of all, what we have is in the last 15 years since 9/11, there have been some incredible efforts made by the Arab and the Muslim American community for greater civic and political engagement. We've had over the last 15 years new organizations, new forms of outreach that have occurred to try to correct and clarify the narrative about Arab and Muslim Americans, and that has by and large been very successful. In fact, one could argue that whatever is happening to the Muslim American and Arab American community today would have been a lot worse had it not been for a lot of this activity that's happened over the last 15 years. At the same time, what's very dangerous about the situation now compared to 9/11 is, if you recall, when 9/11 happened, then President George W. Bush made a very emphatic statement saying that the Muslim and the Arab American community should not, cannot, and will not be blamed for what happened on 9/11. Here we have a contrast to that where, in fact, now the president-elect not only ran a campaign, but has in many ways normalized the anti-Muslim rhetoric and in a sense has turned a blind eye and a quiet tongue to the kind of violence that is occurring. There has been very, very little condemnation, if any. The only statement that he made was on a 60 Minutes interview 2 weeks ago in which he says they should stop it. I mean, that's hardly a very strong statement compared to George W. Bush going to the Islamic Center of Washington, D.C. and making the statement there. So how civil society is responding to someone like Trump now is a far cry from 15 years ago. And at the same time, it's also important to remember that the Muslims are not the only group being targeted now. After 9/11, Muslims and Arab Americans were really isolated because it was the focus being entirely on them. But we find that in general, people of color, people of different sexual orientations, women, people of different ethnic and immigrant backgrounds, as well as Muslims, are all facing abuse and all facing a sense of anxiety now with the current climate.
Yes, Dr. Khan, I want to bring up that point of not just Muslims are being the target right now, but let me first explain to you that when I said should Muslims take part of the blame, what I meant by that is that, you know, from 9/11 until now, we've had not just Al-Qaeda, but also now ISIL, and I'm referring to Muslims' behavior outside of the U.S. I'm not blaming, I'm not referring to all Muslims when I say should Muslims take the blame, but somehow when a regular average American look at what is happening by ISIL in the Middle East, Americans have to wonder what kind of people we are.
Well, I think that's a fair question, but again, I would assess that the sentiment toward Arab and Muslim Americans has very little to do with ISIS or ISIL or acts of terrorism. That I think in many ways is a deflection and is used as a justification to validate racism and bigotry that already exists. What we find is the kind of actions that are being taken against Muslims is because they are visible. I think it's very important to see that, for example, if it was a matter of ISIS or ISIL, then plausibly the main target for the anti-Muslim violence here in the U.S. would be against Arab men of a certain age and a certain ethnicity. But at the same time, what we're finding is that most of this abuse and violence is being directed toward Muslim women, particularly those who are wearing the hijab, the headscarf. And as a result of that, it seems as though it isn't so much about what Muslims or Arabs may be doing overseas or any kind of potential threat that they might pose to the United States through violent extremism, but the fact that Muslims are seen as being a non-white minority with relatively little power and few numbers in the country, so they become then an easy target.
Good morning,
So-
Dr. Jawad. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Dr. Bawardi just joined right now.
Okay, welcome, Dr. Bawardi.
Good morning.
Well,
Good morning. Thank you.
Dr. Hani Bawardi, professor at the University of Michigan. Dr. Bawardi, we were talking about whether or not Arab and Muslim individuals here should at least take part of the blame for what is happening to the general Muslim and Arab community in the U.S. and whether or not the racist reaction against them is partly due to what some Muslims in the Middle East, some Arabs in the Middle East, and I'm talking here about ISIL, are doing, and in which case they basically wonder, Americans wonder what kind of people we are.
By no means should any Muslim individual take the blame for the actions of people like Al-Qaeda or Daesh or ISIL, any more than Christians should take the blame for what, the racist pronouncements made on TV every day against Islam. It doesn't work that way. I think this is a matter of humanity and reason and common sense against ideologues and irrational thinking and behavior. So on the one camp, you must have a collection of people who are like-minded, people who want no more for their children than to go to school, again, education, and succeed and be woven into the fabric of society. We pride ourselves on, or saying many things about America, nation of immigrants, etc., etc. Muslims are now exactly where Irish Americans were in the mid-19th century. In fact, the violence and racism against Irish people and African American people and South Americans, Mexicans and Latinos is unmatched. It is not equaled by the violence towards Muslims to this point, at least. Yes, the sentiment is there. We talk about Trump. Trump is provoking this conversation, and also 9/11 proposed many questions, many unfortunate questions. But don't forget that, we are, by actions of our own, break ourselves down into in-groups and out-groups. This is a recurring theme in American life and societal life in general. And we have to fight the impulse all the time. So during the Reagan administration, Edwin Reese, who can announce the end of the world without raising eyebrows, actually had plans, concrete plans to intern Arab Americans. That was during the Libyan crisis. And the ones who stood in his way were a senator from Hawaii with Japanese ancestry and also Jewish politicians and activists. So it's an ongoing battle. But I want to point a couple of things out. Arabs and Muslims. When I say Arab, I do mean Christians and other faiths, alongside Muslims, have a very, very long history of coexistence. Now we're dealing with someone who's about 2 inches deep, intellectually speaking, namely Donald Trump. But we're forgetting so many lessons of history. As early as the 10th century, you have dialogue and coexistence between them, and a very considerable intellectual life that also included Jews, monotheists. We do well to look back at those examples, perhaps in a separate program. There's much one could say about that. I'm here sitting in my office at home, surrounded by papers from the Farah and the Darak families, volumes of reproduced classical Arab literature from the 20th century and the late 19th century. And the lessons are there in black and white. Everyone was touched by Muslims and Islam at some point in the Middle East and beyond, all to delineate the conversation to combatants whose ignorance simply too much.
Dr. Bawardi, we'll have more questions after the break.
A car accident can change your life in an instant. As a result of a car accident, you may become unemployed. As a result of a car accident, you may need a lot of medical treatment. People think that insurance companies are on their side. Why? Because they're giving them 1 or 2 benefits. Are they giving them all the benefits they deserve? How would one know unless you consult with an attorney? Call the law offices of Shumana Kiruz at 248-557-3645. 248-557-3645.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East, live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and wdmv 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion with our distinguished guests, Dr. Saeed Khan of Wayne State University and Dr. Hani Bawardi of the University of Michigan. We are talking about Donald Trump, the Arab and Muslim communities. Where do they stand? And my question now for both my guests is, and let's start with Dr. Saeed Khan, what makes Donald Trump more appealing now that he has won?
Well, here you have a situation where there's going to be a presumption that whoever is the president-elect is now seated, and so there's going to be this sense of saying by some, well, let's go ahead and give him a chance. For those who voted for him, they feel completely validated and vindicated. And then, of course, for others, they're taking this as a very cautious and fearful time. But the main thing that we see with Trump's victory, as we analyze how he was able to seemingly pull off the improbable, was that he appealed to a large segment of this country that had felt as though they did not have a voice representing them for, in fact, decades. One needs only to go to places like Flint, mid-Michigan, Saginaw, and you see that there is a particular working class section of America, a section of America which in fact had made America great during its manufacturing and industrial boom, who by and large have been, in their minds, isolated or in fact marginalized. He was able to speak directly to them and provide them with a sense of hope, a sense of purpose, and also some kind of a future. And in a world that is becoming globalized, with jobs disappearing because of advanced technology and robotics, because of jobs being outsourced, he was able to go ahead and tap into that anger, that frustration, and particularly tap into this very strong nationalistic streak that we actually see happening elsewhere in the world at the same time. So in essence, what Trump is showing is a pushback on globalization. We see this happening in India with Narendra Modi, very religious, extremist, nationalist fervor. We see this happening in Turkey with Recep Tayyip Erdogan, trying to hearken back to an Ottoman Empire glory. And we see this happening with Putin in Russia. And at the same time, we've just seen in Europe several attempts to go ahead and push back at the European Union, starting over the summer with Brexit in England, the fact that Austria barely pushed back on a far right-wing candidate, a collapse in Italy to nationalists, and also the possibility that in the spring, France will elect a far-right candidate with Marine Le Pen. So we see that this is something that's not just happening in the U.S. I think perhaps many in the U.S. felt as though we might be immune to that kind of toxic rhetoric and also this major shift in the climate in the country.
Dr. Bawardi, what makes Mr. Trump appealing? At least now we know that he did not, even though he did not win the popular vote, but he is president-elect. So what do people around America find appealing about Mr. Trump?
We will have to kind of figure out who, quote unquote, those people are, who find them appealing. And there are enough of them for sure. I agree with Saeed. There has been a shift in the economy, but also in the social sentiments, in attitudes towards immigrants. This is nothing new, actually. It's happened before. During the Nixon years, he capitalized on what is called a backlash in the economy in the South. That's when all those southern states who became staple Republican strongholds were actually southern conservative democratic states that turned Republican. And the reasons for that change were economic as much as they are, jingoistic. And the same thing has happened now. So this is part of the trend. I agree with that also, that in Western Europe, they see their sensibilities insulted by the influx of immigrants from the Southern Hemisphere. They see their societies changing into something they're not familiar with. And people are usually afraid of the unknown. So in the United States, as of about 3 or 4 years ago, the offspring of the Southern Eastern European immigrants, who were very, very reviled when they arrived in this country, by the way, alongside Arabs and Turks and people who not from Northwestern Europe. Anyway, the descendants of these people who were not considered white for a while, and immigrants from India, the Middle East, Africa, and elsewhere from the Southern Hemisphere have outnumbered the number of Northwestern European Anglo stock in this country. And that's what people are anxious about. Of course, the problem is their own to work through. So you have Joe Sixpack somewhere who feels he doesn't have this access to this high-paying job. Manufacturing jobs simply disappeared. And they began to disappear around the same time. Nixon won the election, by the way. That's when people were dabbling with silicon and high-tech industries, things of the sort. Many cities converted to high-tech economy and service economy. The steel belt, now the rust belt, did not. And automobile industry never paid attention to fuel-efficient cars. And they got clobbered. It became became obvious only after the oil embargo of 1973. By then, it was too late. They were overwhelmed by Japanese small, more efficient, better built cars, although the Japanese borrowed, quote unquote, most of the technology from the Americans. And the American companies reacted by just, investing in those foreign companies and aeronautics and space technology, and they still made piles of money, only they did not see a return in their investment in places like Flint, Michigan or Highland Park. And now a businessman is charged with rescuing them from that situation, which is very ironic, by the way. So in this country, I might add that what some people find appealing about Trump is their penchant for exceptionalism, as if, we are waiting to be great again. We should be great again, regardless of the content or the substance of what those words mean. And they see that as, a predestination beyond, being part of a more inclusive, more diverse community of people. That's why minorities have an uphill battle, always have, and they will for a while yet, for inclusion, because of people like those people. I don't like those the choice of words there, because of many who are not accustomed to living side by side with people who do not look and act like them exactly. That's a recurring theme in American life. That's why we have segregation.
Right. Dr. Khan, you cited valid examples of the rise of nationalist movements in Europe, in India, Italy, France, and elsewhere. And my question is, do you see Mr. Trump as merely an extension of that movement, that trend, or is he, or should we expect that he will cause more of the rise in that trend?
Actually, I think it's probably a little bit of both. Trump is definitely a reflection of two major trends that are happening, one global and one national. Excuse me. One, of course, is this whole idea about globalization and the reaction to it being a kind of hyper-nationalism. The other, as Hani was aptly pointing out, this trend has been going on for at least a few decades, and by, as most demographers will suggest, that within another generation, the United States is going to become, for the first time in its history, a majority-minority country, meaning that the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant demographic group will become the minority relative to all of these other groups that are here. That is also leading what is called a moral panic, a sense of anxiety that, number one, it is their country, number two, that it should always be their country, and number three, this fear of the unknown of what will it be like when their numbers are not going to be reflected as the majority. So that is also another driver that, irrespective of the forces of globalization, this is happening locally. And unfortunately, it'll probably be a bumpy ride here in the United States for a while. The issues of globalization that Trump is able to exploit will probably fall by the wayside very shortly, because the kinds of promises that he is making, it's very unlikely he'll be able to deliver on it. The idea of bringing manufacturing jobs back to the United States, well, corporations are going to look at their bottom line, and they're also going to look at what their shareholders' needs are. And if that means that the prices of their shares are going to fall because the profits aren't going to be there, that is going to then cause corporations to reject even some of the threats that he's making to keep them in the United States. At the same time, let's even say that he is successful in bringing back some factory jobs here. We know that automation is the wave of the future. We're talking about, for example, 10 million Americans are truck drivers. There is now a self-driving truck. If in 10 to 20 years self-driving vehicles becomes the norm, you're going to find 10 million people are going to be essentially displaced from the only skill that they may have to offer. So you see that it's technology, it is global forces, not foreigners or immigrants in our midst that are causing these major shifts in economic and cultural factors in the United States. But yet what we find that's dangerous is somebody who knows full well that it's not foreigners doing this, but he's exploiting fear and racism that may be lurking in people's minds and hearts.
We have more to discuss when we come back.
A car accident can change your life in an instant. As a result of a car accident, you may become unemployed. As a result of a car accident, you may need a lot of medical treatment. People think that insurance companies are on their side. Why? Because they're giving them one or two benefits. Are they giving them all the benefits they deserve? How would one know unless you consult with an attorney? Call the law offices of Shumana Kiruz at 248-557-3645. 248-557-3645.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and wdmv 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion with Dr. Saeed and Dr. Hani Bawardi. We are talking about Donald Trump and Arab and Muslim communities in the U.S. And my question now goes to Dr. Hani Bawardi. It is a sensitive question, Dr. Bawardi. It's about the Christian minority among Arab Americans. As we know, Arabs in America are not just Muslim. Perhaps the majority is Christian, or people who first came to this country were Christian Arabs and not Muslim Arabs. So is there any difference about how they feel in terms of Mr. Trump's victory?
Well, there was a time when I could have answered you with confidence. Again, I'm living among my books, a production of the output of the Rabita al-Qalamiyya, the likes of Nadr Haddad, Abdul Masih Haddad, and Gibran, and Nasib Arida, and the rest. And I just translated a letter by Gibran to Muslims, and he reminds them of the commonalities, the long history that combined Muslims and Christian Arabs in the Near East and beyond. Things are different now, but not for religious reasons. Perhaps to some degree for sectarian reasons, attitudes are changing, but at the core, I think the politics unfolding in Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon for a time are the culprit. In our community, I mean, historians are not in a rush always to draw conclusions. We wait a while, we study things, we analyze, and we wait. Most of all, we need social research-driven inquiry. But I am a member of this community. I'm a product of this Arab American experience, whatever that is. We're proposing to unlock this. Let me give you a few facts. At the turn of the 20th century and late 19th century, the majority of the arrivals were in fact Christian. Not 99%, as some of the scholarship claims. In Detroit and Highland Park, to be exact, perhaps because of the Ford factory, perhaps not, you had the largest concentration of Muslims in the United States, in my opinion. Again, the scholarship is very poor about Arab Muslims. We conflate Arab Islam and with Islam in general in Detroit and beyond, and now we have to dig ourselves out of that pseudo scholarship. But at the time, they actually were combined. They identified themselves as Arab Syrian, and then Sunnis, Shi'is, Orthodox Christians, Melkites, etc., in that order. So their concerns were for sharing natural or geographic Syria, and with the British promises against, a slew of conspiracies against them. Now what's happened, after 1965, we have an influx of immigrants who are mostly Muslims, mostly highly educated. After the complexities, after the first and second Gulf Wars, and before that, in the mid-1970s, as a result of the Lebanese Civil War, you have an influx of Shi'i Muslims, and after that, Iraqi Shi'is, and etc. Many people came after 1965 when immigration restrictions were relaxed from Egypt, from the Gulf states, from Iraq, and elsewhere. So you have a very exceedingly complex situation that is vulnerable to political trends. So when trouble sets in places like Iraq, a large country, and spills into Syria and creates a vacuum, I am actually not being cryptic here. The credit all belongs to the Bush administration and the Clinton administration. And Obama, unfortunately, was unable to unhinge people to sit down around the table and talk anyway. So, but when you have trouble like that, people break into different camps. What alarms me the most, this politics will run its course, and people will turn to history and draw its lessons. Arabs and Muslims are intellectually very grounded and extremely powerful. Perhaps that's their greatest weapon. But what scares me the most is that my students in my classrooms who came from southern Lebanon are not aware of basic historical facts relating to the Arab-Israeli conflict, for example. They were told that Bashar al-Assad is a benign ruler who's facing an insurgency, and they're angry because others see it differently, and we're breaking down into sectarian religious lines increasingly. But again, at the core, this is a political issue. Once that burns itself, we'll be in a better place, I think, to reassess and explore the commonalities. Now is a time of hard feelings. Now you have an influx of Syrian immigrants, and we're waiting to see what happens with those. They're being dispersed, adopted by churches and civic groups all over the country. If those guys arrive in larger, sufficient numbers and are attracted to Michigan, you'll see a dynamic. But something has to happen in order to bring people, to narrow the differences between people sooner than later. You have Jewish groups that are helping settle Syrian immigrants more than Arab American civic organizations or social service organizations. That is a dangerous situation. You need material support for them, but we need to educate our own youth about the basic history of the last 100 years at least, and beyond, so that they can draw lessons, and also so that they can have role models, from which are many in our history. They could not think of one unless until after the semester. They might hopefully think, oh, well, we've been here a while. We do have some accomplished people. As it is right now, when I put the question to them, who is your role model? Hardly an Arab American name from the past or a Muslim American name from the past comes up.
Right. Dr. Khan, another sensitive question. The Muslim community here at large is divided ethnically and perhaps also politically. So do we have one voting bloc?
Oh, clearly not. And what we have, we can also add into that equation socioeconomic differences. This is something that has been around really since there has been a Muslim American community. It's important to remember that about a little over a third of the Muslim American community, in fact, is African American, a group which has historically tended to vote Democratic. By contrast, until 2004, the majority of Muslim immigrants were voting for the Republican Party, and in fact did so even in 2000 for George W. Bush. Things changed, of course, dramatically after that, where you see more of a convergence toward voting for one party, the Democratic Party, and that has been the case in 2004, 2008, as well as in 2012. In the case of 2016, there was a little bit of a wobble, and part of that had to do, as Hani pointed out, over Syria. The Syrian issue has been very divisive, very toxic, when it has come to both the Arab and the Muslim communities, where you find that some people, because of family concerns or other loyalties, tended to vote for Trump because they saw his rhetoric being less bellicose toward Assad. And as a result of that, they then decided to vote for him, irrespective of his other rhetoric when it came to Muslim and Arab Americans and how he would deal with them. Some of them, in fact, when interviewed, said that, well, we don't really take that seriously, which of course is ironic because they don't take his rhetoric against Muslim and Arab Americans seriously, but they take his overtures regarding Syria and Assad seriously. At the same time, there are others who towed the party line when it came to voting for the Democratic candidate, but even within there, you see quite a dramatic split within the Muslim community. Those who were all in with Hillary Clinton from the very beginning, but a very large segment which was all in for Bernie Sanders, which caused them a lot of confusion and anxiety when Clinton won the nomination, deciding whether they should still vote for Clinton or should they just stay home or vote for a third-party candidate. When you're talking about a community that represents the broader Muslim world of 1.7 billion people from 57 Muslim-majority countries of every possible sect and subsect here, there's really not going to be much of a consensus, particularly as foreign policy matters are still so significant in the prioritization for Muslim and Arab Americans.
Dr. Bawardi, Mr. Trump says autocratic leaders like Bashar al-Assad in Syria are less harmful than terrorism and terror groups. How will that shape his Middle East policy?
Well, he also said, I think Islam hates us, quote unquote. He thinks he's being pragmatic. I think history likes a winner, and he's thinking, okay, I don't want to understand the opposition, the makeup of the opposition in Syria, or understand how this whole thing started. I just want to keep this guy in his place. This way I will not be on the opposite fence from Russia, which he is adamant at doing, it seems like, even at the risk of compromising European security. Nobody knows if there's a logic to his thinking, to be honest with you. Everyone knows that Bashar al-Assad has been brutal in his treatment of his own people. No one is on his side except Russia. And Russia, unfortunately, found an opening because of the Obama reluctance, administration's reluctance to intervene, of finally reaching the warm waters of the Mediterranean, something they were after for centuries. I don't know what he's thinking, to be honest with you. I don't know why he says the things he's saying or what he hopes will happen. The opposition will continue. If you know anything about the Middle East, regardless of where you stand on the issues, people are tough there. And Iraq has been the longest war the U.S. fought in its history now, longer than World War II, as a matter of fact. And things in Syria and Iraq, where you have massive populations and porous borders, will continue to be unsettled. The ones who pay the price are the people in the Middle East. So in the final analysis, this is a question for Arabs to work through the issues sooner than later.
We'll be back after the break.
A car accident can change your life in an instant. As a result of a car accident, you may become unemployed. As a result of a car accident, you may need a lot of medical treatment. People think that insurance companies are on their side. Why? Because they're giving them one or two benefits. Are they giving them all the benefits they deserve? How would one know unless you consult with an attorney? Call the law offices of Shumana Kiruz at 248-557-3645. 248-557-3645.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and wdmv 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion with Dr. Hani Bawardi of the University of Michigan and Dr. Saeed Khan of Wayne State University. We are talking about Donald Trump and the Arab and Muslim communities in the U.S. And my question now goes to both my distinguished guests. And let's start with Dr. Saeed Khan. Dr. Khan, how do you read so far the appointments to Mr. Trump's cabinet and the different positions that he so far has filled?
Well, none of them look very appealing, unfortunately, particularly from the perspective of Muslim interests. Their rhetoric has been very toxic. They are affiliated with many organizations which the Southern Poverty Law Center, for example, has designated as being Islamophobic. We have, for example, the proposed National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who has in fact said that Islam is a cancer. This, if it is just simply rhetoric, is troubling enough. But in positions like the NSA, which is such a prominent position now, in fact, in some cases is a kind of de facto Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense combined, that posture that he will have and the influence that he will have over the Oval Office is disturbing, to say the least. We still do not know who's going to be Secretary of State, but thus far, some of the names that have been proposed are quite shocking. Rudy Giuliani has certainly made a career since he left the mayor's office in New York as being quite anti-Muslim, and even in fact, even when he was in the position of mayor after 9/11, he authorized mass surveillance of mosques and Muslim neighborhoods. We have General David Petraeus, who in relative terms seems to be the least offensive of some of the choices that have been made. So essentially what we have then is policy which could affect Muslim Americans as being troublesome, and yet at the same time, as Hani has said, we still don't know exactly what is Trump's foreign policy agenda. Now, this could be really awful or maybe just not that awful, depending on how much advice he seeks or how much counsel he seeks from these individuals. We saw, for example, in the George W. Bush administration, a very heavy reliance that the president had on his so-called team. In fact, it was Cheney and Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, and Condoleezza Rice who essentially ran American foreign policy. Now, we don't know if that's going to be the case here with Trump. Does he have his own mind as to what he wants when it comes to America's position in the world? How much of that is driven by real foreign policy or existing foreign policy priorities? How much of it is driven by his own business interests around the world? After all, at the same time that he demonizes Saudi Arabia, during the run-up to the election, he was signing contracts for Trump properties there. So it seems as though even his proposed Muslim ban may have a few holes in it, depending on the financial interest that he may have. We simply do not know right now, but perhaps we will have a little bit better understanding after the first 100 days in office.
Dr. Bawardi.
Well, if you look at his track record, it's very unsettling. From Brian's previous to Stephen Bannon, Michael Flynn, as Saeed indicated, also those people have their mind set about Islam, the Middle East. These are committed to this idea of, dispensations, end of the world days that will happen according to some bizarre interpretations of revelations. I know this sounds kind of out there to some people, but frankly, they made many, many pronouncements to that effect. The most you would think someone who is capable of, approaching things even-handedly. Nikki Haley, I think she's a Sikh American. It turned out she's antagonistic towards immigrants herself. So many of those people, I've done this for Fox News, who became national security advisors, or deputy national security advisor, Kathleen Troya and McFarland and others. All these are ominous signs. I can go down the list one by one, and you wouldn't see much difference between them. For Secretary of State, I'm not very optimistic. His choices are limited there. So the question becomes, is he going to be a radical president like Reagan was in terms of foreign policy and surprise people? Someone who's passive, who runs away from national security briefings, who will do something very drastic and take a hard line on issues, or not, that remains to be seen. He might surprise us. But frankly, the writing is on the wall in many respects. If we're talking about his disposition from Islam and the Middle East, I don't see much change on the horizon unless he flips and his Twitter takes it better of him and does something very drastic. Even then, he's up against Congress and House who are committed behind a certain point of view when it comes to Arab Islam and the Arab-Israeli conflict per se. So we shouldn't wait, frankly. People should build alliances and begin to prepare for the worst, because the worst may be, approaching.
Right. Dr. Khan, some people say Mr. Trump is a flip-flop, and look at what he said about, for example, climate change, and now, yesterday he met with Al Gore and he's reconsidering that position, among other examples. If you were to advise Mr. Trump to do one more flip-flop, if I may say, to lessen the concern of the Arab and Muslim communities, but largely the minorities in the U.S., how would you advise?
Well, I think the greatest thing we need right now is not necessarily a flip-flop, but a real assertion of leadership. And as we had spoken about before, after 9/11, President Bush, within the first few days, made a very public statement and a very visible proclamation of going to a mosque to go ahead and reassure the Muslim and the Arab American communities that he was going to make sure that they would not face any inevitable backlash. And he essentially sent a warning to the American people to say that the Arab and the Muslim American community is an American community and therefore is above any kind of reproach or any kind of reprisals that might happen. That, more than any kind of 180-degree turn by Trump, would perhaps be the most comforting and most reassuring for the community. I wouldn't hold my breath for that because it just doesn't seem as though that's within his nature or in his vocabulary, and that's why perhaps it'll be more interesting to see what policies he in fact does implement and which ones he does not, particularly in the first few months of his administration.
Dr. Bawardi, same question.
I doubt I'll get a phone call from Trump anytime soon, but let's imagine, when he settles and have a chance to speak to him. Again, if you take him at his word that he's his own man, he makes up his own mind, he broke rank with all conventions and traditions, and he has plans for the Middle East, then I would propose a challenge for him to show it, prove it, be your own man. American foreign policy towards the subaltern in general, Arab-Israeli conflict and Muslim countries has been very, very predictable. Racism has been a major permanent component of U.S. foreign policy. Many historians agree on that. The problem is no discernible way of approaching Donald Trump. If he was a traditional or a politician with experience, you might say, okay, Muslims have the same social values as Republicans. Maybe that would be a way to appeal to him. That's happened in the past, and Bush W. actually had a meeting scheduled with Muslim leaders who convinced him to not to say Judeo-Christian this and Judeo-Christian that, to say Arabs, Muslims, and Jews instead, and he did. And they convinced him to criticize or get away from use of secret evidence. All that went out the window when 9/11 hit. And with Donald Trump, ironically, frankly, the only silver lining here is that he might be a departure from conventions which devastated the region and American-Muslim relations and American-Arab relations. He's doing business in the Middle East. He must know something about these people who, I'm sure, if nothing else, show them how generous they can be and how pragmatic they can be. So he should act as his own person. That's what I would say to him. Prove it. Show us something.
Okay, Dr. Khan, we have 1 minute left. And I just want to, you said at the beginning of the program that Muslim activists, political actors, now is much stronger than it was, let's say, 2001 during the 9/11 attacks. And now that we have Donald Trump, what do you think Muslims should do? Should they retreat or should they do something else?
Retreat is clearly not an option. We have already crossed that Rubicon. We're here to stay. I think it's a matter of asserting that Arab and Muslims are as much American as anybody else. And of course, there's that quintessentially American virtue of civic and political engagement. What I think has to happen, though, is for the Arab and the Muslim communities to break out of whatever bubbles, either self-imposed or imposed upon them, to reach out, form coalitions. We are not the only people who have the values, the objectives, and the concerns as Americans. There are many others. In fact, many of those same groups are being targeted by the rhetoric and by the actions and policies that Trump is proposing. Now is the time to go ahead and create stronger alliances with them in order to push back. As you had said earlier, the majority of the country did not vote for him. That is a sign of optimism to not only maintain the majority of dissent, but in fact to build upon it.
Thank you, Dr. Khan, Saeed Khan, Dr. Hani Bawardi. Thank you for joining us.